Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Doug, ready to study with you in the Gospel of Mark. I've been enjoying this study. I hope that you have too. We are now in the 8th chapter and looking at Jesus showing his compassion again. He's been on that walkabout as we talked about last week, and now he's moving a little faster and he's going to be taking a little ride in the boat across the Sea of Galilee. So I'm picking up in the New American Standard Version of the 8th chapter, verse 1. Reading what has been come to known as the story of the feeding of the 4,000. In those days, when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on their way, and some of them will have come from a great distance. And excuse me. And his disciples answered him, where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? And he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them and started giving them to his disciples to serve them, and they served them to the people. They also had a few small fish, and after he blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. And they ate, and they were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over from the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and they sent them away. And immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him. I guess that's one way to greet Jesus. Seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. And they had forgotten to take bread, and did not have more than 1 loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. They began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have hardened hearts? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets of broken pieces you picked up? And they said, 12. And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, do you not yet understand? And they came to Bethsaida. And they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men, for I see them like trees walking around. Then he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began seeing everything clearly. And he sent him home, saying, do not even enter the village. We'll stop there. That's verses 1 through 26 of chapter 8 of Mark. A lot of interesting things going on as Jesus is going in and around the area in Galilee. And so in those days where Jesus was at, he was probably on the east bank at this time. Remember, he'd gone around and had come down to the other side. He hadn't crossed over yet. And so he's on that eastern shore. A lot of variations of where exactly that might be. But Matthew refers to this feeding as well. And there is a large crowd. That's one of the things that you can depend on Jesus wherever he goes. People are showing up. There were many, many of those who had gathered themselves together, and they had nothing to eat. Now, it's not that they didn't come without anything to eat to start with, but they are at a point where now they have nothing to eat. And I don't know how you get whenever you don't get anything to eat, but a lot of us are not at our best whenever we start to have those pains and our body is telling us that, hey, we need something to eat, our blood sugar is all out of whack. We can be less than a good crowd, but these guys, man, they were willing to do whatever they needed to do, whatever needed to personally suffer, so they could be with Jesus and listen to him. Can you imagine if people had an attitude like that today, that they so much wanted to be with Jesus, that they would even forego food so long as they could be near him and learn from him and perhaps be touched by him? And and Jesus said to his disciples, um, I feel compassion. And this word for compassion, splanchne, is the term for the guts. I don't know if you've ever had a gut feeling before. He doesn't say the heart. He does have a word for the heart. Doesn't say the mind. He says the stomach. When you really are emotionally overwhelmed at someone else's needs, you feel it physically. And that's what this term is talking about. Um, Jesus is hurting for them. His body is empathizing with them, and he wants to have compassion on them. He sees their need, he understands their need, and he can do something about their need. And he says that the reason the people don't have anything to eat is because now they've been with him for 3 days. I mean, it's one time thing to show up and the sermon goes long and, hey, preacher, you need to cut it short. We got to get to the restaurant before everybody else does. Another thing, if you just went entirely over that meal, even in the next, this has been 3 days Jesus has been teaching. It's in a desert area. It's not an area where there's a lot of population, not one of the cities like you get over on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. There are some people out there, otherwise you wouldn't have a crowd. There are some villages, but not the kind of villages that could sustain just saying, hey, wow, we got 4,000 people showing up for dinner. They just can't do that. And Jesus says, man, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they won't even make it to their houses. They'll faint on the way. That's how much Jesus's compassion is going. Some of them has come a really far distance. We just can't send them back empty-handed. It kind of reminds me of what James wrote in his letter. It says, what good is it, your faith, if someone comes to you and they're hungry and you do nothing about it? You show them God's love with your faith, and I'll show them God's love with something that I'll actually do, like feed them. And Jesus, well, this is where it all starts, right? He sees them, he feels compassion for them, and he wants to feed them. The disciples, it's not that they don't want to feed them, they just can't see how it's possible. And very often, as Jesus' disciples, that's the problem we run into. It's not that we don't want to help, or even that we don't even feel compassion. We just look at the immense need and we say, we can't do that. It's too much. We don't have the resources to take care of that. And so Jesus asked them, well, how many loaves do you have? It's not like it's the first time he's asked them this question. And they do have some loaves. So the disciples have food for themselves. They got 7 loaves of bread. It might be enough for the 12, at least for one meal. But man, amongst 4,000, it's not much. And Jesus directed them directing the people to sit down on the ground. And he often is doing that. He said, hey guys, we're going to take a break from the teaching. You've been with me for 3. Can you imagine a sermon from Jesus for 3 days long? They probably heard all of the parables. They heard the Sermon on the Mount, expansions of it, things that we just have glimpses of as we read the scriptures together. And they're getting 3 days seminar with Jesus. He sits them down, and taking the 7 loaves, he gives thanks. And it is that word that's that common word for giving thanks, Euchariste, to good, to have, toward. What happens whenever you receive something, and the feeling that you get. And so he's giving thanks to God for what he does have and what he can do with what he has. He's given thanks for these people, I'm assuming, who have come to talk with him. And so they come, they start giving and serving it, and they serve these disciples. Um, and afterwards, they go, "Hey, Jesus, we also got some fish." It doesn't tell us how many, it just says a few. And he blesses them, and he serves them. They serve them as well, and they all ate and were satisfied. I don't know the last time you had a meal where you ate to the point that you were satisfied, but it wasn't just a little bit. They ate and they were physically satisfied. So this wasn't like a magic trick. It wasn't some kind of oh, we'll all pretend like we're eating. This was real food that satisfied real bodies, and it was done in a miraculous, we can't explain it kind of way. The only answer is that Jesus can do the impossible. Jesus can do the impossible because he is the Son of God. He's the only one who can do the impossible things. And whenever he sent the disciples around to keep from having the place littered with food, they came back and they had 7 baskets left over. The 5,000, they had 12. This time they only had 7. And then he sent the crowd away, and he and his disciples, that good word here in verse 10 that Mark loves, straight away, he entered the boat with his disciples, and they go across the Sea of Galilee. Now they go over to the east side. They're a little further down, a place called Dalmanutha, maybe a region there. Magdala is the same area. Has more than one name. There's a lot of discussions about that because the other Gospels use that other name for the same area. And so whether one's talking about a town, one's talking about an area, and you have to understand there were lots of people in control, and so they had lots of names for the same places back then too. So it's not an issue. The Pharisees greeting, though. Jesus gets there. He lands, instead of a crowd that's been following him around like he's been having trouble with, the first people they see Jesus come out, and it's the religious leaders, these Pharisees, those who are pure, wanting to be pure, trying to get the people to be pure, because they believe that's what needs to happen for God to send the Messiah. And here's the Messiah, and they don't recognize him. But hey, maybe it is Jesus. How are you going to know it's Jesus or not? Well, hey, Jesus, could you just do something? Could you do a sign to show us that you're really who you say you are? They want to do that because they were testing. They had heard, they had seen, and they weren't real sure that Jesus was who he claimed to be. They weren't sure that Jesus could really do the things that they were hearing that he could do. They certainly had questions about whether he was really God's son or not. In fact, that was a problem for them. And so they were testing Jesus. Interesting that this term for test, perazzo, can also be translated tempt in some places, depending on where it shows up at. It's a term for scrutinizing or enticing, endeavoring. It can be translated by context a lot of different ways, but here it gets translated, at least in the New American Standard Version, as a test. They were trying to see who Jesus really was. And you can understand that. There's some times whenever people tell us one thing and we want to see the proof of the pudding. We want to see, how do we know it's really true or not? And Jesus sighs deeply. It says he sighs deep in his spirit. He's pained. Here are the lost sheep of Israel. They're the sheep of Israel, but they're lost because they don't recognize the shepherd who has come to save them. And he says, why does this generation of God's people, why does this generation seek for a sign? Why are you always looking for a sign? I say to you, you're not going to get one. Well, really? You're not going to get a sign? Well, Jesus has been showing them sign after sign after sign. And we're studying Mark's gospel. John's gospel is set up on the signs that reveal that Jesus is the Messiah. And he did them to these very people, the same generation who were seeking a sign, but they weren't accepting the signs that Jesus gave to them. And if you don't accept something as a sign, then there is no sign. And so Jesus' words here, they're not going to get a sign because they can't see it, they can't understand it, even when it's right in front of them. So he leaves them and he gets back in the boat. They go again to the other side. They basically have come from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other. And now he's going up, and so they're going across toward up to Bethsaida. They're going to be a little bit on the west side, just right off the center, the top of the Sea of Galilee. And so they get in, they go to the other side, but they're going north this time. And well, when they take off, they aren't there very long. Remember, they don't have any bread, and they didn't pick up any at this new location. Um, and they're still on the go, and the disciples are hungry. I don't know if the disciples ate and got satisfied or not with the 4,000. Um, But, they get to the other side. They're going up there. They're having this discussion with each other. Hey, we don't got any bread. What are we going to do? They had forgotten, and they were talking about it. And Jesus is aware of it. And he gives them an order. And this is the imperative kind. Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And this is leaven in a negative sense. There are some places in Scripture where leaven is used in a positive sense, where you take a little thing and it influences a larger thing. Um, but whenever that little thing is negative, it can influence a lot of people. It's what the media does. The media takes a message and they try to distribute it and they try to influence a whole lot of people. And unfortunately, a lot of times what the media puts out is very negative. The church, on the other side, should be trying to do the same thing. We should be trying to put a leaven out that's going to influence a big deal, but we should need to be putting something good in there. We need to be expressions of love, expressions of compassion, teaching the truth about how we can best enjoy the life that God has given us here and put our hope in the eternity, how to care for one another and put up with one another and forgive one another, how to live in harmony with one another. We need to be influencing in this positive way. I love that a lot of people who are online refer to themselves as influencers because they understand it. They're influencing people. Um, and Jesus is saying, man, watch out for the influence of the Pharisees, these guys that we just left behind. Herod's and his people are no better, but they're influencing a lot of people. And we have that today. We have a lot of people that are out there influencing the world, even influencing the people of the church with something that's not good. And he's warning his disciples about that. They start discussing themselves again. We get this in verse 16. Oh, yeah, guys, we don't got any bread. And Jesus, being aware of this, addresses what he sees is the real problem. Why are you discussing the fact that you don't have any bread? Do you not yet, mine says see, but it's the word noia, it's the word mind. Do you not understand? Do you not know? Do you not comprehend? And then the next one is, do you not even know together? Can't you put it together? The facts that you've been seeing here. He says, aren't you getting it yet? Do you have hard hearts? Sometimes we can't see who Jesus is and his ability to do the impossible because our hearts are hardened. Kind of like Pharaoh. God is doing miracles, but it's not changing us because, like the Pharisees, we're not seeing it as God's power and not seeing it as his influence. And we have our hearts hardened against him. And Jesus is asking that of his disciples, not the world, his own disciples who've been seeing all these things, who've been witnessing these things. Um, and he says, do you not have eyes to see, and having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves of the 5,000, how many basketfuls were left over and you picked up? And they said, oh, sure, 12. And how many that we just did when I fed the 4,000? 7. Don't you understand? You can just hear the exasperation in Jesus's voice. And I hope he's not that way with us whenever we turn to him for help, when we're trying to learn from him, when we're seeing the obstacles and we just say, there is absolutely no way. And Jesus is saying, hey, it's me. Don't you remember? Don't you understand? Can't you see? Um, sometimes we see without seeing when we look at Jesus, um, rather than seeing him as the Messiah, the one who can work wonders. I don't know. We see him as just a person or an idea, as some just a fairy tale. But I hope that you're coming to learn to see him as Lord of life, the one who's the victor over the grave, who not only forgives us of our sins, but who cares for us in this life. And so they aren't, well, doesn't say what happens. I'm assuming that the disciples are starting to get the picture a little better. Now, when they arrive at Bethsaida, they get an entirely different welcome by an entirely different group of people. There's a group of people who come to Jesus not looking for a sign, but help. Man, the Pharisees weren't coming for help. They weren't coming to Jesus to say, hey, you who can do the impossible, help us out. They were trying to test. Can he? These people were bringing a blind man to Jesus and saying, hey, Jesus, could you just touch this guy and heal him? They're coming with faith. They're coming with expectation. They're coming with hope that he will. Now, I don't know if he will or not. They're asking him. If they do something for this man who's blind. And whenever Jesus gets there and he looks at them, he tells them, hey, yeah, I'm gonna have to do something for this guy. And so very, we know what's going on there, spits at him in his eye. We kind of use that as a derogatory term, spit in my eye. But here Jesus spits on him, and talking about something that's very non-COVID. Jesus is getting his germs all over him. Fortunately, Jesus doesn't have any diseases that he's sharing. He asks the guy, what can you see now? And this guy is going like, oh, man, I can sort of see. I can tell there are people out there, but they're like trees walking around. And so Jesus takes him out a little further and heals him. And he sees completely. I think it's interesting that Jesus is here healing a man who's physically blind so that they can see clearly. And he's been working with his disciples who are a little spiritually blind. They can see Jesus, but they're not seeing him like they should yet, because they're not understanding and they're not seeing. So there is this tension in this passage between Jesus being able to heal the physical blindness. And let me tell you, if he can heal physical blindness, he can heal the spiritual blindness. And that's probably what affects most of us. He can take us just as he took his disciples, and he can lead us to that point where we can see him clearly, and we can cast our cares on him. We can turn to him for help, and we can be transformed into his people who are walking in his ways, who are sharing his love and sharing the testimony, the difference that only he can make. Interesting, at the end of this one, Jesus tells this man that he's taken out of the city, who he's just given sight to, and says, don't go back in there. Why not? Why not go back in there? Why not go back in there as a witness and telling them? because Jesus is more interested in hearing people come to him for their spiritual rather than just their physical. Now, coming with the physical is better than where the Pharisees were at. But he wants them to come to say, hey, Jesus, man, the real problem in my life, and all the problems in my life, are a result of me not living as God would want me to live. And I need to be forgiven, and I need to be transformed, and I need to be set free so that I can enjoy life as God designed it to be. And I want to be with him forever, and I need to follow you to get there. I hope you've enjoyed this portion of our study of the Gospel of Mark, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Hey, if you got any comments, you can certainly send them to me and post them, do something like that. Always join the page, all the things they tell you on YouTube, right? And I hope that you do, and I hope that God blesses you. And we'll see you next week.